everyone. My name's Peter Daiga. I'm the president and CEO of ABC Florida East Coast Chapter.
And I'm Sonny Macon. I'm the COO at ABC Florida East Coast. We want to welcome you to episode number 10. We hit double digits. We have not been canceled yet.
It's a miracle.
It's a miracle.
All right, so the Obvious Podcast is a production of the ABC Florida East Coast Chapter, and unless otherwise stated, all content reflects the opinions of the guests and hosts.
And if you like the podcast, which you're here, I'm assuming you do, you can subscribe to it on all of the major platforms such as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, amongst others. You can also look at us on YouTube. You can also reach us on an email, which is theobvious@abceastflorida.com if you have any comments. If you want to help others find the podcast, please leave a review on your platform. You can also find us on social media. The links will be on the screen or in the show notes if you're listening to us in the audio version. So, Peter, I had a question for you.
Shoot. What do we have this week, Sonny?
This week, we are discussing what form of government are we? If you were to grab a person on the street and say, hey, what's the form of government in the U.S., what would they say? What do you think the average person would say?
Yeah, well, which street and what city is this? No, just kidding. They'd probably say, well, we're a democracy, of course. You know? To which Benjamin Franklin's famous quote, I think it was quoted as saying during the Continental Congress, a woman approached him. I think it was Ben Franklin.
It was Benjamin.
And a woman approached him and she said, good Mr. Franklin, what form of government have you all given us?
And
to which he
said,
replied,
it's a republic if you can keep it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Two very important things.
Two very important
in a very short sentence by Ben Franklin.
Ben Franklin.
A, the type of government they gave us, which was a republic. So, and then he also said, if you can keep it. So we've managed to, kind of. We might be hanging on by a thread right here, but
we wanted to do an episode on this subject because, there's such a profound lack of understanding on the differences, right? And it's fascinating to me. What really got me thinking on the subject was our director sent a video to both of us, which was put out by PragerU, sort of delineating the difference between a republic and a democracy. And not just a difference, but as to why the founding fathers, who could have completely gone the straight democratic route, didn't, right? What kind of drove them to look at the checks and balances. And so what I wanted to do, the link to the video will be available in the show notes. It'll be listed on YouTube. So you can see the whole video, but we're going to go through the video together, and then Peter and I will just sort of pause and kind of talk about what really strikes us in the video that we think you would find interesting and certainly informative.
Sure, and before you start that, this is really relevant, as you all listening know. There's been a lot of conversation leading up to the election about things like the Electoral College and the popular vote, and no doubt after Election Day, there'll probably be more conversation about this. So this is a very pertinent conversation, I think, to what's happening in current affairs right now.
And it's deeply connected. The Electoral College conversation is deeply connected to the difference, the distinction between republic and democracy, and why. Before we get into this conversation, I just want to share with you a story that really kind of changed my perspective. I don't know if you know this, but I used to be married to an attorney from Mississippi, and this is before I was married, so it's at least 22 years ago. I am having lunch at this another attorney who was a friend of hers at their home, and the subject came up. Actually, of all things, we were discussing illegal immigration, and I made a comment about the people's will or something to that effect. And this attorney looked at me, and he was of the Republican persuasion, and he just looked at me. And he said, "Listen, if this country had been a straight democracy,
I think I know where this is going."
Right? And he just was like, "Can you imagine how long it would have taken to get rid of slavery?" And he said, if you polled the people when they were getting rid of segregation, the democracy would have never allowed you to move past that.
Yeah, because a lot of our founding fathers, the people who gave us our country, likened democracy to mob rule.
Mob rule. the tyranny of the majority, I think.
Which is why we, had the struggles and the battles and the conversations we did about our Constitution, about our Bill of Rights, about certain inalienable rights that are given to us as people that no mob, no democracy could even take away.
Right. But what I think
we weren't perfect, which
Right.
is the point. There was a lot of cultural things going back centuries before the United States gained its independence, and for at least a century after, if not more.
Yeah.
To where we struggled.
But I do think, if you were to kind of flip the coin and say, okay, fine, we believe that we're a republic. I mean, obviously we are. And I think the whole success of the republic then becomes contingent upon the wisdom of the representation, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have terrible representation, and it's so fascinating to me because you look at how different states are, which is how they intended it to be. And this video gets into it, and it's super fascinating. And you look at California, and then you compare it to Texas or Florida, and you look at New York, and you look at how, especially during COVID, right? People were like, oh, I care about my freedom. I want schools to be open. I want to,
Right. Sure.
I want to be able to run my business. I'm getting out of here, right?
Right.
I remember seeing this lady who ran a restaurant in Minnesota who, under Tim Walz's guidance, was so oppressed. She moved to Wisconsin to open her deli because she was dying. She couldn't survive in Minnesota.
So let's dig into this video.
Yeah.
So that we have enough time to comment on it. If you've never heard of PragerU, you will have now, and they're an amazing educational organization. Mostly
Dennis
through
Prager, I believe, started it.
Mostly through social media and
Social
the
media
internet,
and
I
online,
think.
yeah.
But let's run through this short video. It won't be short by the time we stop and comment on it. But
it's only 5 minutes, five and a half minutes long, so you can absolutely check it out. It's all over YouTube as well.
So the differences between a republic and a democracy.
All right, here we go.
At the close of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, legend has it that a woman called out to Benjamin Franklin to ask what kind of government the delegates had created. Franklin responded, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." A republic? Shouldn't Franklin have said a democracy? Isn't that what we have in the United States? Most people today would say yes. After all, if our country isn't a democracy, what is it? It's not a dictatorship, the rule of one man, or an oligarchy ruled by a small group.
I was just going to say, you could question that.
You could question
whether
that.
a small group is running the country, but in any event. What we're attempting to do here is just talk about, in its purity,
Right.
What we were given and what we, how we should reflect on how our government operates, not the sarcastic side, which I often tend to, that yes, some people could argue maybe we're closer to an oligarchy these days, but in any event, sorry. So
All right. He's going to get into the breakdown in Greek now.
okay,
In America, the people are in charge. That's literally what democracy means in the original Greek. Demos, kratos. The people, demos, rule, kratos.
I'm just going to tell you the host, his name just went by me, but he is a professor of jurisprudence at Princeton. So he's no intellectual dummy,
But let's pause for a moment and consider more deeply what the word means in practice and why the delegates in Philadelphia rejected it. That's right, rejected it. Our government was established by a national charter, the Constitution of the United States. We are governed by the institutions and according to the rules and principles created and adopted when our forebears ratified that document, making it the supreme law of the land. Are those institutions, properly speaking, democratic? The men who bequeathed our form of government to us, those we call our founding fathers, didn't see it that way. They understood the institutions established by the Constitution to be republican. In fact, though the founders believed in government of the people, by the people, for the people, as Abraham Lincoln put it in the Gettysburg Address, they did not believe in pure or unrestricted democracy. They feared that democracy, strictly speaking, contained within it the impulse to mob rule, the stifling of civil liberty, the trampling by majorities of the rights of minorities.
That whole piece where he talks about the rights of minorities and mob rule made me think of the French Revolution and how mob rule just kind of took over. And there's plenty of historical instances where mob rule has completely backfired, right?
For sure.
And whether it's you're talking about oligarchy or dictatorships. And you think about this is something you and I have talked about when Barack Obama was president and the Arab Spring took place. You had a lot of dictators that were thrown out because the younger generation was finally tired of it, right? And I'll specifically remember Hosni Mubarak, who was the president of Egypt at the time and had been for a long time. In fact, he was kind of put there by Donald Rumsfeld because the previous leader before him was assassinated for signing the deal with Israel, the peace deal under Jimmy Carter. So Rumsfeld went to Egypt, found Hosni Mubarak, put him in place. And then finally, Hosni's in the 70s. People are tired of it. People are tired of the mob, the dictatorship that they lived under because Egypt, 88 million people, no natural resources, no oil. So massive unemployment amongst young people. Barack Obama finally said, I'm not supporting Hosni Mubarak. And he's deposed, leaves office, and they have elections. And the minute they have elections, they vote in the Muslim Brotherhood, right? That's who gets elected. So immediately, minority rights are curtailed. Coptic Christians are in trouble. Women are in trouble. So there's all these things kind of happening in Egypt. And the army, I don't know if you know this, but Egypt gets more U.S. aid than Israel, than any other country in the world. And the Egyptian army is very close to the U.S. army.
Even to this day?
Even to this day.
Yeah.
And so there's a guy named General Assisi who basically was asked, okay, this is not going to work out. You need to take over again. So it's a long story to say mob rule in Egypt has never really kind of worked out. Like pure democracy has never really worked out because they elect.
If you don't have a form of government that's going to protect you from those majority, especially minority rights or just general human rights that we've come to consider as general human rights in the West or in the United States anyway. So yeah, I mean you're right. That's one example, but you could probably point to countless examples over the last several decades around the world. So
where people complain about this for Gaza when all this stuff is happening that Hamas keeps getting elected and they keep voting in Hamas. So now, I obviously don't know the situation well enough to know if the elections are fair and honest or whatever, but every time they're given a chance to vote, the mob rule tends to vote a certain way, which is problematic with Western values when it comes to things like human rights and minority rights and things like that.
So while they built into the Constitution significant democratic elements, they also built in non-democratic features to protect liberty and prevent tyranny. It wasn't simply that they favored representative government over direct democracy, though they did. It's that they rejected the idea that the majority wins was by definition the just outcome. Indeed, in what is perhaps the most famous of the 85 Federalist Papers, Federalist 10, James Madison, precisely in distinguishing a democracy, which he did not favor, from a republic, which he did, noted that a crucial advantage of republicanism is to refine the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of the country. And so we have representative government, and more than that, we have a bicameral, that is, two-tiered legislature, a Congress with a highly democratic House of Representatives and a not very democratic Senate. Therefore, California, with its massive population, has 52 representatives in the House. Wyoming has 1. Yet Wyoming has 2 senators, the same number as California and every other state. A pure Democrat would say that's unfair. Each Wyoming resident has far more power than every Californian. But a Republican would say, well, we aren't and shouldn't be a pure democracy. If we were, large population states like California would overwhelm the needs and interests of small population states like Wyoming. That's why we're called the United States of America. Each state has its own separate identity, holds its own separate elections. Just as we don't want one person or small group of people to dominate our government, we don't want one.
I love that line. a republic is a way of diffusing power, right?
Yeah.
First of all, Mr.
I mean, all this is
Producer,
probably very familiar because I bet these conversations are raging right now, because, the outcome of the presidential election, as an example, is going to be decided by who wins the electoral college.
Yeah.
Not the nationwide popular vote. And it's precise. He's laying out the precise reason why it's set up that way. I'm sorry, you were going to say.
No, I was just going to say thank you to Mr. Producer for sending this video along. And, this gentleman does a great job of sort of breaking down the why, right? Mm-hmm. We are the way we are, but why? And this electoral college, I've seen Vivek Ramaswamy not answer that question satisfactorily, right?
As well.
Yeah, as the way this guy does it.
And the Constitution's procedures for choosing a president. An obvious possibility would a state or a few states to dominate our government. A republic is a way of diffusing power, and a brilliant one at that. We see something similar in the Constitution's procedures for choosing a president. An obvious possibility would have been by a national popular vote. The founders wisely decided against this option. Rather, they created an electoral college to protect the interests of the less populous states. Even today, their decision makes sense. As my Princeton colleague, Professor Alan Gelzo, observes, a direct national popular vote would incentivize campaigns to focus almost exclusively on densely populated urban areas. The electoral college system incentivizes candidates to court voters more broadly, making presidential elections more fully national. So if we understand the system of government our founders bequeathed to us, we will see why they preferred to describe it as a republic rather than a democracy. Of course, it has strong democratic elements, but America was not created to be a pure democracy, for very good reasons. Those reasons remain as valid today as they were in 1789. We should not go along with those who today are demanding constitutional changes simply because this or that institution or procedure established by the Constitution, say the Senate or the Electoral College, is not democratic. More democratic doesn't necessarily mean better. It doesn't necessarily mean more just. Our founders understood this. So should we. We have a republic, and we should keep it. I'm Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program at Princeton University, for Prager University.
This video was made possible by a generous donation from the William S. Knight Foundation.
Wow.
Great video.
Yeah, great video. Our thanks to Prager for producing something that well and that eloquently, right. And I find the idea of just, right? Like he says it a few times. And he said the founders wanted a government that was just. And the idea that justice is so seeped into the DNA of why the system is set up the way it's set up. And I really wish every college student could see this, right? Every college student could understand why the Electoral College matters, why the Senate matters, why we're not just, because the whims of the majority change all the time.
Absolutely.
All the time.
So, there's further implications, too, I think, of this video. It's not just the type of government that we have in terms of elected officials, but even the government, the regulatory, the ruling government is kind of designed.
Right.
Now, there's some real challenges, I think, today, which maybe we can get into at another podcast, but
yes.
It was designed to diffuse power as well, right?
Absolutely.
From the president to the judiciary to the legislative, and when one gets too powerful, which you could argue we keep threatening that we're going to do on the Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch's book, and he makes a good case, I think, of how too much power is in the hands of the regulatory, which is really the executive, branch and its agencies, today. So, and there has to be some kind of realignment or rebalancing, I think, to protect further. But any event, maybe for a future podcast. But it gets to the point, I think, of, diffusing power.
Diffusing power.
Excellent
and
video.
I know you and I have had many conversations about the Chevron mandate and how, thankfully the Supreme Court has kind of placed that aside. And the idea that, okay, fine, we're not a democracy, so then we'll turn around and give all this power to unelected bureaucrats who are accountable to no one. And so, I'm grateful for organizations like this, grateful for organizations like Center for Individual Rights and all these organizations that exist to fight the system and then to help the people not be ruled by a
Right. So how does the Bill of Rights fit into the republic versus democracy argument?
The First Amendment. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, right? I mean, if that wasn't there, the whole thing falls apart.
But that's just speech that we agree with,
No.
speech that we like, right?
No. We've talked about this, right? Like offensive speech.
Maybe some of those items in the Bill of Rights are offensive to people.
I'm sure.
Second Amendment.
Yeah, her name's Hillary Clinton, and she wants to make sure that, we don't lose control, as she said in a recent interview.
Right. We don't lose control. Very interesting, right, on the heels of this video. The control and the we and the power and how to diffuse it and how to, so yeah. Very interesting. So
Well, we are out of time.
live.
So we hope.
I hope you enjoyed this video.
Absolutely.
Every once in a while, something like this comes along that's just so spectacular. It's so pertinent to the current conversation that we wanted to share it.
And we'll bring it to your attention and certainly have a conversation about it.
Yeah, it was fun. I hope you found it fun too.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day and a great week. And we will see you on the next episode.
Don't forget, send us your comments anytime via email to theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Until next time. Ciao.